Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. In particular, the viewer told me recently that they wanted to limit the size of the space where the combats take place. So, as it was up to the previous video, the enemies could retreat as many times as they wanted. They could just keep going into new range bands, and so too the player character could just keep retreating if the player wanted. There's no sort of end point, and that isn't how the viewer wanted the combats to work. They wanted both ends of the combat to be limited, to run out of space, and then they also wanted the size to be persistent from game to game. So if the bridge is has 12 range bands in one game, well, the next time you play it, it should have 12 range bands. It shouldn't be a random thing that's generated each time. And of course, that means that we need to store that in an array in the code of the game, just as we store how many enemies of each type there is in these areas. They also wanted whether it's possible to escape from a given end of the combat. In other words, if you keep retreating, what happens? Do you run out of room and you can't retreat anymore, or do you retreat and then that's it, you've sort of run away from the combat? Well, that should also be persistent from game to game. So I've set up a game here. You can see that it's telling us we're going to be on the bridge. It's generated the enemies. None of this is new. This is all as it has been. This screen and the next screen are going to be are the same, or look the same as they have in previous videos. But the next screen, the screen to come, should be slightly different. So we have two differences here. Firstly, you can see that it isn't just giving us the range bands where there are some enemies. It's giving us these extra range bands here that don't have anyone in them. And that is that's telling us the size of the space that we have to fight in. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 bands here behind the enemies. They can retreat 4 times, and that's as far as they can go. And similarly, we have 2 behind us, and that's as far as we can go. We also have this phrase closed at both ends, and that's saying whether you can run away from the combat by retreating 1 more. And in this case, it will always say either open or closed, and in this case it is closed at both ends. You can't, if the companion, if they wanted to retreat, they could retreat once. From there they could retreat again, but that's it. They just don't have the option of moving any further back. Whereas in other combats, it might be that they can move back, and that means that they leave the combat. And similarly, the player character might be able to do that. And in other combats, the enemies might be able to do that based on what's up here. Because we always count distance 0 as being where the player character is, the names of these bands are going to change. So if the player character moved forward, well, they can't because there's an enemy there, but let's say they moved backwards, well, this would now become distance 0, this would become distance -1, but there wouldn't be, the virtual environment will stay the same, and we'll have to code it so that happens. But for now, let's have a look at the code that allows the changes that we've made so far. So, as you might imagine, there are several new variables. The most detailed of which is probably the array ENC_GEO, which stands for Encounter Geography. So we have this array, ENC_DET, standing for Encounter Details, and it has the name of the encounter, and then it has how many of each type of enemy there are in that encounter. And in this array, we have details about the size of the environment and the escapability of the environment. So slot 0 is whether you can escape from the PC's end, slot 1 is whether you can escape from the enemy's end, and then -3 and 6, the next two are the lower and upper bounds of the range bands at the start of the combat. So if we look at bridge, we can see that it is 0, 0, which means 0 means closed and 1 means open. It's closed for at both ends, so no one can escape, and it runs from -2 to 9, from range band -2 to -9, with the player characters and the player character and any companions that they might have starting in 0 and the enemy starting in 1 to 5. Now you might say, well, but these all sound like encounter details. Why have a new array for these details? Why not just add extra slots to ENC_DET? Well, the reason I didn't do that is because that would make it very difficult to add new monster types. So because at the moment we've got the names in slot 0 of ENC_DET, and then that's enemy type 1, that's enemy type 2, that's enemy type 3. And we could just say, all right, well, slot 4 is whether it's escapable from one end, slot 5 is whether it's escapable from another end. But let's say we wanted to add a fourth monster type. Well, the obvious place to put it is slot 4, because we've got the other 3 enemies in slots 1, 2, and 3, but we already have something in slot 4. So we would need to change. We might say, all right, well, the data that was in slot 4 has to now move to the end, and then we'd have to change every reference in the code to slot 4 to be slot 10 or whatever it is. And that's doable. That's certainly something we could do, but it would be easier if we could just add a number to the end of this array. If we wanted to, add a number to each of these slots to say how many of this new fourth type of enemy there are, and then we'd update other arrays to give the name of the enemy and their stats and so on. Now, I mean, odds are that we won't be adding a fourth enemy type, but I think it's a good principle to always code in such a way that it's as easy as possible to expand the game, with as little work as possible. So having a separate array, it's a bit more fiddly at the start, but if we were wanting to expand it, it would make that a lot easier. So that's why I've decided to do that. Certainly, if we were certain that we were never going to have a fourth enemy type, well, we could just add data to this array, but that makes it less expandable. And I think a little bit of fiddliness is worth it to preserve the ease of expansion. Second question you might have is, why are these indexed by text? You've got, normally when you have an array, as in this case, we just have slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, slot 4, etc. In this, we don't have that. We have slot downtown cafe, slot nightclub, slot megastore, etc. Why do that? Well, I could have done it by numbers, but I wanted to make it easy to see which slot relates to which encounter. In this array, we've got the names of the place where the encounter happens is slot 0. So we don't need to put that in there. We can just have a number and have that there. But down here, I suppose we could have put the place in slot 0 again, but then that's doubling, that's sort of having the same information twice, and that didn't seem like the best thing to do. So I thought it would be better to put it in these slots, and then it's easy to go, well, I'm working on the temple. Well, obviously that one's the temple. You're not going to mistake this one for the temple or this one for the temple. It's easy to see that one's the temple. If these were just numbered, you'd have to go, okay, I want to work on the temple. The temple is slot 6. So I'll go down to slot 6 in this array, and that's that one. And that's not a lot of work, but if you were changing 3 or 4 different areas and you were in a hurry, you can see how that might sort of increase the chance of making mistakes. So that's why I did it with the text. Okay, so that's ENC_GEO. That's probably the most, the biggest variable, I suppose. We have some others. We have band low and band high. That is the lowest range band of the current combat and the highest range band of the current combat, respectively. Why do we have these in variables? Why can't we just refer to the ENC_GEO array? Because look, it's got those details there. Well, remember that we're counting slot 0 as being where the player character is. So if the player character moves, the boundaries are not going to be, for example, -3 to 6 or -2 to 9 or whatever we've got listed. They're going to shift. So we therefore need to shift what numbers mark the ends of the environment. Now we could, of course, abandon the idea that the player character is in slot 0, but I've coded quite a lot of it with that assumption, so it's probably easier to do it the way that I'm doing it now. So we've got band low and band high. They are the numbers that are the range of range bands in which we are fighting, and then we have ESC PC and ESC NME. Oh, sorry, ESC_PC and ESC_NME, and that is whether escape is possible from the player character's end, whether escape is possible from the enemy's end. Again, you could say, well, why don't we just refer to the array? Well, the answer is, and that's another way to do it, and that's fine. And I may end up doing that at some point. But the reason for that is just that when we set up the combat, the way we've set up the combat, we don't keep track of which area it is once we've set up the combat. And so it's better to have two variables for those bits of information. We could do it another way. We could just have a variable that's where the combat is taking place and then refer to a slot in the array. That might, in the long run, that might be the better way to do it. But for now, we're doing it with separate variables. All right, so how do we set this up? Well, we have to change a little bit of what's happening in setup combat. We have to add some stuff, mainly that we're writing things into those variables, band high, band low, and ESC_PC and ESC_NME. And when we're printing the distances, that there's a slight change there as well. We have to print the open or closed at either end, and the range of which distances we're printing is different. So let's look into setup combat, first of all. And this is these are the additions of code, and they're all basically the same sort of concept. We set one of those four variables to be equal to ENC_GEO that, and then a number. So let's look at that. That's the thing. This bit is the thing that makes it complicated. We've got a reference in there. We've got sort of nested references to different variables. So let's look at that thing there, because that's really what makes it complicated. We've got ENC_DET $Z0, where $Z is the which combat we're dealing with at the moment. Well, all that is some text which tells you where we are. So that's going to be Downtown Cafe, Temple, Brewery, whatever it might be. And because ENC_GEO is indexed by text, we want to look at ENC_GEO Temple some number. So that's where we have the text. That line of code there tells us what location text we're using. So band low, once we realize that, this is fairly straightforward. Band low is ENC_GEO, let's say Temple 2. Band high is the same thing, but it's slot 3. Escape PC is the same thing, but it's slot 0. Escape NME is the same thing, but it's slot 1. And if we look at ENC_GEO, we can see that, yes, slot 0 is the PC escape. Slot 1 is the enemy escape. Slot 2, sorry, I've put a line break there. Slot 2 is the lowest numbered range band. Slot 3 is the highest numbered range band. Let's go down here. Slot 0, PC escape. Slot 1, enemy escape. Slot 2, lowest range band. Slot 3, highest range band. Although we've expressed it in a different way. It's the furthest back the PCs can go without leaving the combat, but that just means the same thing as the lowest numbered range band, given that the PC end is the low numbered end. All right, so we've set up those variables. And the other change we need is when we're printing distances. So there's two changes. As I said, first of all, is we're printing this open or closed at either end. So up here we have if ESC underscore NME is equal to 1, we print open, otherwise we print closed. And then at the end of the code, where the PCs are, because they're sort of down the bottom, we have exactly the same, except it looks at ESC underscore PC rather than ESC underscore NME. We used to have quite a lot of code to find the range of range bands which contained characters. We don't need to do that now, because that was the purpose of doing that was to tell us which range bands to put in this for loop. And we know which range bands to put in the for loop. We start from band high, we go down to band low. When I say band high, I mean band underscore high and band underscore low, going down by 1 each time. And printing the distance works exactly the same as it has done, so I won't go through that again. But the change is we get rid of that code to find which range we're looking at, because we're always going to go from band high down to band low, because now we have a sort of fixed environment. We have to remember that when the player character moves, band high and band low will change to preserve the environment. And that's how we do that. One thing I will say is you might remember that we were doing commands, and we did 3 out of the 4 possible commands, and then we didn't do the 4th one. And the reason we didn't do the 4th one is because the 4th command is go back to the lowest range band and attack from there. And we didn't have a lowest range band because the way it was set up, you could just retreat indefinitely. Well, now we've got a lowest range band. It will be easy to add that 4th command. But that is something that we'll be doing in future videos. For now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.